He spent over 15 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit in Texas. Mr. Richard Miles, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm good. How you doing, Mr. Clay?
I'm doing good. Thank you for being here, sir. Like I said, you spent 15 years behind bars for a crime you didn't commit. You were released in 2009. You were officially exonerated in 2012. But I always start here, sir. This you were 19 years old when this happened to you back in Texas. Just tell me the young man that you were before all this happened to you. What were you doing with your life? Who were you back then? In 1994,
Right. So
to be exact.
1994. So first and foremost, once again, I'm just honored to be able to share my journey on this platform. Thank you, Mr. Clay, and all your listeners. You know, in 1994, I had just recently graduated from high school. I attended Skyline High School and Kimball High School, and my journey was to go to TSTC in Waco to take up plastics engineering, which was one of the vocational clusters that was taught at Skyline during that point in time. After I graduated, I moved out, talked to my mom and dad. I was like, hey, I'm working at McDonald's. I want to take this journey. And so that was when I left in 1993 to move in with one of my friends to further pursue my collegiate role in education. So that's who Richard Miles really was, at the age of 19, just really trying to find myself based upon graduation and what my mom and dad had instilled in me.
So before we talk about the incident, I just kind of want to take folks a little bit through what happened to you. If I have this right, you're literally on the street, just chilling, minding your business, living your life. You're a teenager, and you're stopped by police and accused of a crime. Is that accurate? You're just literally standing, minding your business.
I was walking home, so I had, earlier that day, I stayed in North Dallas, and one of my friends drove me from North Dallas to Oak Cliff to visit my girlfriend. She stayed in some apartments. I stayed at the apartments pretty much all day, and the buses had stopped running. And so I asked one of my friends that stayed in the apartments to drive me back home. Well, his girlfriend stayed right around the corner from where I stayed, so it really was an inconvenience for him. But he drove me. I gave him $5, and we got to her house first. She stayed on the corner of University and Roper in North Dallas. I stayed on the corner of Cresthaven and Bluffview. So it's literally, maybe about a 5 or 10 minute walk at best. So I was walking home that night and I had to stop at a payphone because this was before cell phones was out. I had to stop at a payphone to call my friend to tell him to unlock the door to let me in. And so I wasn't just really aimlessly out on the street. I was walking home.
Got you. So you're literally walking while black. You're literally walking while
Yes,
black,
sir.
and you are
Yes,
stopped by
sir.
police. You have no idea what's going on. You have no idea there was a crime at a gas station. You have no idea what's going on. What do you think when police stop you? What's your first reaction?
Honestly, being 19, I was scared, just to be fully transparent. I mean, if you're just walking down the street, so I remember I walked by a police car that was at the stop sign and didn't really pay any attention to it. And the next thing you hear is a helicopter and police cars come from everywhere. Well, if you hadn't done nothing, you're not going to take off running anyway, right? And so I'm yielding to all of these commands that's coming because I'm literally scared. I remember laying on the ground and the people they put the handcuffs on me and they was asking me, "Where's the gun? Where's the gun?" Nobody actually articulated why I was being arrested. Right. The full time they're just arresting me. They're reading me my Miranda rights and they put me in this police car. Now I'm telling them that my friend just dropped me off. He's right around the corner. I'm explaining to the police officers how I got to North Dallas, and they could call him. And during the time that I was in the police car, they was like, "Well, when you get downtown, you just tell the detective everything that you're telling us, and if it checks out, you'll be going home." Uh, so I didn't have anything to place a feeling on. I was just filled with so many different emotions at that point in time.
Didn't they drive you to the scene and some person you've never known,
Yeah.
never seen a day in your life, I believe a guy named Maurice Thurman, said, "Oh, he's the guy that committed this crime." Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the gentleman name was Mr. Marcus Thurman, and
Marcus
yes,
Thurman.
so
Sorry about that.
basically,
Yeah.
yeah. So what they basically, when I was arrested, they took me to this crime scene, and well, they took me to a Texaco. I'm going to say that because that night I didn't know it was a crime scene. So I'm
Right.
put in a police car. They take me to a Texaco. When I'm taken out of out the police car, I look around. I see police cars and ambulances. I see people everywhere. I didn't particularly see Mr. Thurman. However, I would later on find out that out of the 10 witnesses that saw this shooting, Mr. Thurman was the only one behind the Texaco. And this is where you bring up a one-on-one tainted identification process because of the procedure that the police officers took when they arrested me. They should have took me straight down to homicide and conducted the gunshot residue test down there than to take me by a crime scene and do a one-on-one process identification thing. Um, uh, yeah, so that's what happened right after I was handcuffed. They took me to the Texaco.
Did did you hear him say this is the guy? Did you didn't know he identified you?
No,
They just bring you down there. All right. So what happened? This is in May of 1994. DeAndre Shea Williams and Robert J. Johnson Jr. They're shot at this Texaco gas station. DeAndre Shea Williams, he's killed, and Robert Ray Johnson Jr. He survives, but he's severely injured. Do you have any idea why they stopped you on that street as you were walking, Mr. Miles? Do you know? I think I read something about a floppy hat, which is the. I mean, do you have any idea why they
yeah,
stopped you? Why they targeted you?
yeah. I would later learn out how they. So I was arrested about 5 miles away from where this crime happened, walking right. And I would later find out that them connecting me to this crime scene was very important. And their connection to me to this crime scene was through Mr. Thurman. So when the shooting happens, they're at this Texaco service station. Somebody shoots into this car, and they run behind the Texaco service station, and a white Cadillac comes to pick this person up. Well, according to Mr. Thurman's original testimony, he jumps into his car, he follows this Cadillac, and he sees this Cadillac drop the shooter off on Lemon Avenue by the Sewell Cadillac shops, right? So Mr. Thurman makes a U-turn. The Cadillac is gone up the street. He sees this person. Mr. Thurman then goes to the Texaco. And by the time he gets to the Texaco, the detectives and everything are there, and he tells them then, I seen the shooter being let out of a Cadillac on Lemon. Well, in that time frame, this is what the Innocent Project figured out. Now I've been dropped off and I'm walking up the street. So I'm walking now in the area where Mr. Marcus Thurman saw the shooter being let out about 15 minutes prior. And so that was the connectivity of me to that crime scene. And that's why they was particularly driving in that area. Now, I will also say that the description of the shooter was 6'2", 6'4", real dark complected. I didn't fit the description of the shooter, so they had no reason to arrest me, irregardless if I was walking in that same vicinity or
You're like
whatever.
5'9", right? You're five
Yeah,
nine,
I'm
right?
fine.
Nowhere near
Yeah,
six.
I'm
Yeah.
right. Light skinned, you know what I'm saying? I didn't have on the clothes that the shooter. So it was still no reason for them to arrest me when I didn't fit the physical description.
So you're taken to the station. Your photograph is taken. You still don't know what's going on, and then Thurman again identifies you as the gunman. Just give us a little bit of background of what this interrogation is like, being at the station, and then when you're finally finding out what you're being accused of.
Yeah, so those things happen. I want to say they may have happened at the same time because I never saw. My first time meeting Mr. Thurman or seeing Mr. Thurman was in my jury trial, right? and then he would be an influential part of my case being overturned later on. However, I never saw the lineup that was done. They did what you call a photographic lineup. Now, the photographic lineup was tainted because I was the only one in the photographic lineup with a white T-shirt on, and so that kind of made that picture pick out. However, on my end, when I was introduced to the detective, I'm sitting in the room and I gave the detective phone numbers of everybody who I had been with. I gave him phone numbers of the guy that drove me from Oak Cliff, from North Dallas to Oak Cliff, the gentleman that drove me back home, his mom's number, his girlfriend's number, my girlfriend number, and I was arrested like they say about 30 or 40 minutes after this crime had happened. So I didn't have time to build up an alibi. The detective went out, he stayed gone for a couple of hours and came back in and told me that my alibi is checked out, but they had a witness that say they saw me shoot one person and kill another person, and I was going to be arraigned for murder. And so that was the first time that I had actually that my charges were actually articulated, and that was probably about maybe 6 or 7 hours after I was arrested, actually.
Wow. So you are arrested May of 94. Your trial isn't until August of 95. Are you behind bars the entire time waiting for trial?
Yeah, once they arrested me May 15th, I didn't walk out till October 2009.
Wow. The fact that you're just walking down the street, that's some scary, scary stuff. So before the trial, you're behind bars. Tell me how you're surviving. Tell me how you're getting by, even before the trial. Because we all hear jail is much more violent than prison. I know that that can be
Right,
relative, of course. But how are you getting
right.
by? How are you surviving?
For me, I think I have to just tap into the my history of growing up was my dad and my mom, and so I grew up in a very close knit family, and I think that a lot of people that are introduced into our criminal legal system, either innocent or guilty, they don't have that piece. And if they do have that piece, they don't really treasure it. And so for me, going through this process, I treasured the relationship of my mom and my dad, my sisters and brothers, and they were very impactful on me wanting to stay out of the way, right? I got into a couple of fights in the county. Um, a lot of times it's from you, there's no real written handbook on how you conduct yourself in prison. If you saw the movie Shawshank Redemption, you learn as you grow. And so, I mean, that was my journey, right? But I also met a lot of good men in there, right? I met a lot of good men that taught me a lot, and that's really structured me to the person that I am today. My biggest thing in the county jail was interacting with my court appointed attorney and getting my family them to really look at our criminal legal system as a system that's not always equitable. And just because I have a court appointed attorney, that doesn't mean that this person is going to work to me to his fullest. He has financial limitations, which will eventually be to my detriment. But, it was an everyday process and walk in the county.
So tell me a bit about this trial because folks are listening and they're like, I believe there was a total of 10 witnesses, correct? And only one, this guy Marcus, identifies you. So for folks, I mean, we know there's racism and classism involved, not having enough money, but for folks listening, there's no physical evidence. I mean, you have alibi beyond alibis. Uh, how do they manage to convict you?
Yeah, so it was a structural setup. So it was 10 witnesses that was at the crime scene. Nine of these witnesses all did the photographic lineup and told him that the shooter was not in the lineup. Somehow, these nine witnesses were never called in to testify. And at the end of the trial, my lawyer obviously tried to submit their affidavits, but that went away as hearsay. outside of those nine witnesses, you have Marcus Thurman that testified, but you also had the gentleman that was shot. He testified that I really didn't look like the shooter. You know, I was too light skinned. They had a young lady that was talking to them that saw the person come up to the car. She really couldn't identify me as the shooter. Another gentleman came in and testified that I didn't look nothing like the shooter, right? And so I think it was witness. They prevented a lot of witnesses from coming in that would have added a lot more context. But even with that, my alibis came to testify. Um, it was a very vivid picture that I did not have a physical structure of 6'2", 6'4", real dark complected. And so the prosecutor had to get around that piece. And so his statement was, I understand some may be challenged that Richard doesn't fit the physical description. I want y'all to know that he has been in the county jail 17 months. And so his skin complexion has kind of lightened up to kind of cast some type of thought in the jury's mind that my skin complexion would dramatically change because I was, you know, denied access to sunlight or something like that.
Wait a minute.
Um,
Hold on a second. Wait, this is a new one. I've heard a
yeah,
lot of stuff from
I
prosecutors.
know,
They
I know.
they said the reason why you didn't, mind you, your height can't change. You're still
My
5'9",
height can
not
change,
over. Yeah, but
right?
they said, oh, to explain why you're not the complexion of the person that people thought. They said that
Yeah,
you got a lot lighter when you were behind bars. Wow.
yeah. This is one of the
What
things.
was the what
Uh-huh.
was the were there any black folks in the jury? Because I'm assuming a black juror would know. Okay, that don't make any sense. I mean, a
Uh,
white juror should know that too. But what was the makeup of the jury?
I had a diverse jury. As a matter of fact, the jury foreman was a young black lady. So I cannot hang my hat on a jury that was not diverse. I can't hang my hat on a jury that was just not knowledgeable of what reasonable doubt is. It's just accepting the fact that they have a person locked up and they don't even entertain innocent until proven guilty. They feel like the lawyer is there to prove that person innocent. And so the average juror has already convicted the person that's in trial anyway.
Mm. So, all that said, you are convicted August 25th, 1995. Your original sentence is 40 years for murder and 20 years for attempted murder. When you hear that, Mr. Miles, what goes through your soul?
Oh man, I remember when they cast the verdict. I had been in a holdover for about 6 hours, and they called me out. I was the only one over there, and when they brought the verdict, everything just it was like the lights had shut out. And I remember sitting down and my lawyer nudging me, and he was saying, "Richard, stand up, stand up. You have to honor the court." And innately in me, I was like, "How can you honor a system that doesn't honor the citizens?" Because I've been wrongfully accused and convicted. The parallel of this whole thing was, number one, maintaining my innocence. But in order for you to file an appeal, you got to sign the conviction. And so I'm signing my life away to the state of Texas for the total of 60 years. The 40 years going to eat up to 20. But I'm signing this paper, and in the back, I hear my mom crying because they have witnessed an injustice, and I heard the victim's family elated with joy because they feel justice has been served. And so herein lies the paradox of wrongful convictions, where an injustice is served sometimes three or four ways in one slam of the hammer.
And I do want to add, in case folks are wondering about that eyewitness, Marcus Thurman, he would eventually recant, and he would
Yeah.
say that police pressured him to say that you were the person who committed this crime. Um, how do you, man? How do you how do you let that go? Do you are you angry about that? What did you think when you heard him say, "Yeah, it was a lie, but I was pressured."
Yeah, so the first thing is, and I think another piece that we're missing is the gunshot residue test. And
Oh yeah.
so as far as physical, yeah, so as far as physical evidence that was presented in my trial, it was the testimony of Mr. Thurman, and it was this gunshot residue test that came back positive in the palm of my right hand, but negative anywhere else. That was very critical during trial because number one, I'm left-handed. Number two, it was only in the palm of my right hand, and we didn't have the resources to hire a gunshot residue analyst to challenge what the state presented. And so that piece of evidence was presented as fact. We would later find out that it wasn't true. And so it wasn't just Marcus Thurman's identification of me, because I truly believe that Marcus Thurman did see the person that did the shooting and he did follow the car. But I also believe to his case, to my case, it was the prosecutor that was pushing the needle because Marcus Thurman's affidavit states that the day of trial, the prosecutor had my picture in his pocket because Thurman was telling him, he said, man, I can't faithfully say that that is the person that did the shooting. Well, the prosecutor coerced him more, and he goes in and does what he does. Well, he signs the affidavit later, but also the gunshot residue test. This is signed later on when the Innocence Organization picks up my case because they have the resources to hire somebody to test the gunshot residue test. My hands were not even positive, not even what was identified in my palm. They take this back
Wow.
to SWIFT, Southwest Institute
So
for
wait, I'm
Forensic
sorry.
Science.
I'm sorry, Mr. Miles. I
Yeah,
want to get this right. They said that your left hand had gunshot residue, but even that was a lie?
no, my right, it said the palm of my right hand
The palm of your right
came
hand.
back positive.
Okay.
Yes, they said that that was positive for gunshot residue test
But you're
in
left-handed.
trial,
Yeah, you're
but I'm
left-handed.
left-handed. So
Yeah.
my lawyer tried to fight that because we didn't have anybody to dispute it. He didn't hire a gunshot analyst to test. He just took what the state presented.
But come to find
Fast,
out, you didn't even have gunshot residue in your
correct.
right hand at all. Wow.
When the when the Innocence Organization picked up my case in 2007, they jumped on my case in 2007. They began to do the work and they hired a gunshot residue analyst, and she came back with the findings that my hands were not positive. And so the lady that testified signed an affidavit stating that if given an opportunity, she would not testify in the same manner as she did back in 1994. So that's why my case just totally fell apart.
I do want to ask you, you spent 15 years behind bars in total. So you kind of explained a bit as far as when you were in, I guess, county jail, but 15 years behind bars. How are you surviving? How are you getting by just the day by day being behind bars wrongfully?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and I think this addresses the question that you was asking earlier as far as the feelings. I experienced every emotion under the sun. I experienced, I hated the system in which had entrapped me. I felt that, I felt that my mom and dad could have did more by doing this and doing that. I didn't know their capacity, but I was just hurting. I wanted to take my own life sometimes because I felt like my innocence had been snuffed out. But I think that a couple of things allow me to maintain my anchor. The first thing, I have to go back to my spiritual upbringing from growing up in the church, because when I got locked up, we read about the story of Joseph, but you don't believe it until you actually walk through it. And Joseph was somebody that was wrongfully arrested and imprisoned. And so I remember challenging the word at his word. I was like, man, God, if you're true, I'm in a Joseph situation. And so that was a spiritual anchor for me. Once again, my family and my education was important because it allowed me to try to find something to occupy my time while I was incarcerated. And the final piece is one of the first people I met on Cofield. I spent all my time on Cofield Unit. It's the largest prison in Texas. It houses over 5,000 men. Uh, the first person I met was a guy named Ben Spencer that was innocent. And this guy is working in a barber shop. And I remember as you go through intake, you have to go to the barber shop. And I'm talking about my situation, and Ben gives me the address to Centurion, which is the innocence organization that would eventually get me out. And they just got him out about 2 years ago. Ben did about 34 years in prison. But what God showed me right then was this was bigger than me. Ben told me to go to the law library, and that's why I filed my writ of habeas corpus 1107 after my direct appeal was denied. But I was taught by a guy named Ricky Wyatt. Ricky Wyatt was innocent. Ricky Wyatt did over 36 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit. And so here I am in a system, and I can't be, oh, woe is me, because it's a whole bunch of more of us in there. And so I think that really fueled me personally to go through and then come out with something um, tangible so that people can see and feel what our system is doing.
How was your mother and father impacted by this? I mean, you go by, you're arrested as a teenager. How were they impacted?
Yeah, my mom has always been the glue of our family. I remember when technology changed and you could start kind of doing stuff with the paper and putting pictures on paper. She would send me letters uh, with her face on it as if we was physically talking. And so we would have that kind of like visual interaction. Um, they stayed with me, but life was going on. My dad began to fight with cancer. My dad was he was a minister, and he passed 6 months before I got out. And so the last time I saw my dad was December of 2008. But he would make sure my mom came down to visit me every month. My brothers and sisters, um, they walked this journey with me. Some of the community people kind of shunned away from him because here you have a son and you have a minister, and your son is, some may not view that as being uh, or your calling being true if your family is falling apart, right? But people don't know the systemic issues of why families fall apart. Uh, and so I think my situation took a toll on my dad's life, but he still fought, and he was even talked about in the my ruling, my case ruling, which is ex parte Richard Miles. It's in the Southwest Third Edition. So they went through it with me. They went through it with me.
Wow. Wow. So because of all that you laid out and you've got in contact with the Innocence Project and it's Centurion Ministries, Innocent, that's correct? Am I saying it right? Centurion?
Centurion, like the 100
Centurion.
soldiers. Yes, Centurion.
You
Yes.
are released October 2009, but you are exonerated officially February 2012. You were also compensated by the state. And because of that, you established, well, not because of that, you were going to do it anyway, but explain miles of freedom.
Yes, sir. And so I was released in '09. I walked the journey for 2.5 years of somebody returning home from prison. Um, and I had been gone for 15 years. They had locked me up at 19, and I'm walking out at 34. I was lost. I had a family, and everything that I got from the time I got out to before I got exonerated was because somebody opened a door for me. And so my mom letting me stay there. The first job that I got was through a minister at our church. It was very little that I could do by myself on my own coming out of prison. And I understood that in Texas, over 7,000 people, over 70,000 people at one point was being released, right, annually, right? Historically, where are they going to go, right? And so for me, once I got financially compensated, the money came from a very dark place. It came from a wrongful conviction. It came from years in prison. It came from losing my dad. And so for me, it was like, how can this money change? How can it make me feel better about what I went through? And so we started the 501c3 Miles of Freedom. And the mission of Miles of Freedom is to provide services for individuals, families, and communities impacted by incarceration. And our primary focus is not just those that are innocent. Our primary focus is anybody that's impacted by incarceration because we understand that it takes a community to really wrap themselves around the individual and the family as they return back to their community. And so we've celebrated just 10 years last year. We've worked with over 1,700 men and women over the past 10 years. We have direct case management that does everything from helping you find your ID to helping you find employment in a house. We have workshops. We also have a lawn service. And most recently, we kicked off a food distribution program with the North Texas Food Bank, where since 2019, we've distributed over 1. Probably 4 million pounds of food. And the distribution is no income restriction, no zip code restriction. So it's just if you're hungry, you can come by and get something to eat. And we do that like 4 days a week. Um, so Miles of Freedom has really been an opportunity for me to be in constant therapy, but also to create a solution to the space that I feel I can be most valuable in, and that's our criminal legal system.
Well, I have to add too, I love this that actual policy was created in 2021. The Richer Miles Act bill on police accountability was signed in Texas. That's phenomenal. Please tell us about the Richer Miles Act.
Yeah, that was, so many things that God has blessed us to accomplish. It's just awesome. In 2019, I was reached out to by Representative Anchia in the state of Texas to begin to testify on a bill that was particularly talking about accountability, making sure that when police officers finish their investigations, they sign off saying everything is in this file. Because in my case, they already had they already knew who the shooter was before I went to trial. This was never turned over in trial. So it was multiple pieces of documents in the police file that was never turned over during jury trial that would have kept me from being found guilty. Fast forward, Representative Anchia understood this. We began testifying in 2019, but we were shot down in 2020. And so in 2021, District Attorney John Cruzo in Dallas, Texas, and Senator Royce West came back and they understood the fact of humanizing our legislation. They wanted to put a face on it. And they asked me, and said, since you've already started testifying on this, A, do you want to go back in and help us testify again? And B, can we name the bill after you? I mean, I was floored. I was honored, but I also know that there's so many other people that's been impacted as I was negatively impacted. And so we went forward testifying, and it was signed into law in 2021. And so it holds uh, police officers, detectives, anybody that's a part of that investigative standpoint, it holds them accountable to make sure that everything is put into the record and it's turned over to the prosecutors and to their attorneys.
It's really an important point because you brought up a couple things. The rep that you were working with, and also the DA. How do you say his last name again, John? How do you say it?
John. Cruzo,
Cruzo.
CR.
So
Yes. Mhm.
yeah, he's a black DA, and this is the importance of
Yes.
voting locally. You got to vote locally. I mean,
Hmm.
I know Texas, you got Governor Greg Abbott and all that kind of stuff, but this is a prime example of the people who were there locally were able to pass this bill. So that's just phenomenal to hear.
Yeah.
Before you go, I want to ask you. I talk to a lot of exonerees, and I'm always curious to know, especially when you go behind bars as a teenager. Those are formative years, your 20s, your early 30s. When you are released, how are you cultivating relationships? I don't know, simple things like dating. Like, how are you able to navigate that? Because those are such crucial times where you make the mistakes, when you're in your early 20s and so on. But they took that away from you, and we all want
Yeah.
companionship and a connection with other human beings. So, how are you able to heal to be able to cultivate just relationships with people?
Yeah, I mean that's an important piece because that's one of the most um, instrumental elements that a person can either revert back to doing negative things or be progressive and growing into who you truly are. Because prison does stagnate you, incarceration stagnates you. Quick story: I was working in the infirmary on Cofield unit, and I had been locked up about 11 years. And as the nurses would come in, they would speak and they would say, "Good morning, Mr. Miles." And my response was, "All right, all right." It was just like this real hard, "All right, all right." And so one day the lady asked me, she said, "Richard, we always say, well, Mr. Miles, we always say good morning. Why don't you ever respond back? Good morning." And it was the first time that I had been challenged on how I had been thinking. This woman woke me up in prison because in prison, when you look at your cellie, you don't say good morning. You look at him, you say, "You all right?" And his response is, "I'm all right, I'm all right." And so it becomes a culture, it becomes a norm inside of prison. And you don't understand that you've been institutionalized until somebody wakes you up and you begin to make those changes within the system before you can get out of the system. And so it was some of those changes that I was able to make because I understood I was handicapped. Coming out of prison, we have to be in a space of vulnerability. And most men, most women don't want to be in a space of vulnerability. I knew that I was in a space of vulnerability. I was handicapped. I relied on people that I trusted in, i.e., my family. I relied on people that I had built relationships with that was productive, the Innocence Organization, my attorneys. And so I had networks of people around me that I saw positive things in. And so I gravitated to that energy. Coming out of prison, the same thing. Um, During the dating phase, I didn't know anything about dating. You couldn't tell me how to talk to a woman because in prison you don't talk to women. If your wife don't come see you, especially in Texas, you don't have that opportunity to grow emotionally. And I remember I've been married now almost 10 years. When I first got married, my wife was always asking me, "Hey, where you want to go today? What you want to do?" Well, I literally didn't know. And she took that as I wasn't interested. But the more she understood, I had been so absent from society that I didn't know. But I was willing to learn and I was willing to be around positive people that would feed into me positive information. And I just encourage people that's coming out of prison to be around positive people that will pour positive information in you and understand your vulnerabilities and your handicaps.
Well said. That's so powerful. I'm sorry, one more quick thing I got to ask you. There's been all this talk
Yes,
about,
sir.
you know, people upset that like in Florida, there's conversations about, some movements to abolish prisons and so on. But I like to ask exonerees this. I don't think it would ever happen, but do you think prisons should be abolished, or do you think that we need the prison system?
That's a great question. And I would say that there is a movement going on, and I won't say that a structure of a structure of accountability for one's crimes is needed in society. Whether we define that as prison or whatever, we need a structure of accountability. I will say that the challenge for America is the 13th Amendment except clause, because what happens is we are still cultivating a culture of slavery when you imprison people and work them for either free, as in the 5 states, 5 southern states in the United States, or you work them for minimal, when you detach medical assistance, when you disconnect families, when you don't give them education, you've created a culture of slavery. So I would say the challenge is not so much as to do away with prisons, but to do away with the system that's cultivated within the prison walls.
And that's why we have to have, college, students or AP courses need to have these kind of conversations. Look how nuanced and, layered you made that as somebody who was wrongfully convicted. I do want to say,
Right.
obviously, Richard Miles is doing amazing work. You can go to milesoffreedom.org. You can also donate to Miles of Freedom via Cash App. It's dollar sign, the number one, MOF, as in Miles of Freedom. That's Cash App, dollar sign, the number one, MOF, Miles of Freedom. And of course, you can go to milesoffreedom.org. So make sure y'all support.